My very special guest is the Chief Strategy Officer at the Predictive Index and the General Manager of PI Perform. He joined PI when the talent optimization leader acquired Charma, where he was co-founder and CEO. He is Adam Berke. Welcome to the show, Adam.
Hi, Matt. How's it going?
It's good seeing you.
You too.
I've been looking forward to this conversation, and I'll tell you, I thought we could get started with this. You have had an experience that very few people get to have, which is that you were a founding member of NextRoll, and you grew it to over 500 employees. So I wanted to start us with this. What were some of the biggest challenges that you faced when you grew that business?
Well, yeah. So there was a founding team in place for sure. That so there was 3 or 4 of us kind of there at the start, and I think one of the things that worked really well is that we all had our clear swim lanes at the beginning, and so that really helped in the early stages. But the thing that I really found challenging is that as we grew, the expectations evolved from being in that swim lane and staying, kind of focusing on your expertise. And I'm kind of a product-minded entrepreneur to evolving to start to manage teams, and then not just manage teams, but manage managers who are managing teams. And that scaling process is pretty unnatural. And I think a lot of people deal with that either as they grow their own businesses or within their teams as they're growing their teams and need to scale. And just that realization that the skill set of being a manager is that it's an actual skill set. And it's not just, you do your regular job and then, manage people on the side. Like it is something you really need to be intentional about. And it's often very different than the skill set that got you to where you are. And so, my skills as being either like a product leader or go-to-market leader, being hands-on in those areas is very different than managing go-to-market teams or product teams.
Well, it's almost like you earn your way to have new problems. And so now all of a sudden you mentioned, I could imagine there's a couple of things that really jump out at me in your response. One is that, when there's 4 of us, we kind of all know we've got our own little pieces, and you might collaborate, sure, but there's not quite so much complexity and overlap and getting in each other's soup, so to speak. Yeah. And then as the company gets bigger, now, not only is that happening more often, we're more tightly dependent on one another, perhaps than even we were. Now we're managing through other people who are managing people, like you said. So it's a layer of complexity for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, within those teams, you have people who are setting themselves apart from a performance perspective, doing great work in their role. And then, okay, well, hey, we're about to launch a new sales team, and this great salesperson should probably lead that team. It's like, well, those are 2 very different things. And so, you're constantly grappling with that aspect of things as well, in terms of developing people and talent optimization, as it were, where the skill sets of the person that got them to where they are, then, it's a fractal, that dynamic goes all the way down.
Yeah. You're adding 500 employees along the way. So it's like, that's a lot of new culture, a lot of new skills and responsibility. So it's a lot of complexity in a hurry.
Full-time managers, a lot of people who are growing into leadership for the first time.
Yeah, exactly. And later on, you founded a new company, and I want to ask you, what did you learn from that experience? So you had the chance to go from founding team, 4 or 5 members, whatever, up to, 500. So what did you learn from that experience that really helped you to launch the new startup and even made you want to do another startup?
Yeah, well, doing it. I guess the thing I learned was the level of masochism I have ingrained in me to do it a second time. But yeah, I mean, the founding of Charma was really about handling that problem that I experienced scaling NextRoll on a personal level, evolving from being a founder and individual contributor to being a manager, and then an executive that was managing other managers. And I struggled with that evolution, and as we were just talking about, saw other people on the team struggle with that evolution. And the idea behind Charma was to be a toolkit that could help people navigate that, and that the skill set of being a manager is not something that's automatic. It's not something that's necessarily always obvious. And it's a place where software could play a role in guiding people to best practices and guiding them to do the things that would help them be a better manager. And even for experienced managers, giving them a framework to execute and take mental overhead off of all the things that they're trying to keep track of in terms of being a good manager and what's going on with everybody on their team. If you're managing 4, 5, 8, 9 people, it's just impossible to keep everything in your head. And so providing a framework and a structure for that was what we were hoping to solve with Charma.
I get to talk to leaders all the time, and I talk about their managers and the struggles that they have and maybe why they don't quite have the effectiveness that they might want. I always ask, why? What's holding them back? And the thing I hear over and over again, they don't have the training. I'm like, oh, so you're going to train them? They're like, no. Well, okay. So maybe there is an opportunity to give them some tools, some scaffolding. It sounds like that was a big part of what you were targeting.
Yeah, well, and training is one thing, but I think as we all know, like there's only so much you can retain. And once you get back into your day-to-day life, all those good intentions and things you learn can very quickly go out the window if there isn't something there to reinforce it. And so that was really the idea. It was like bring the training into a daily use experience, a daily use toolkit that can put the things that you learned in the training into practice. So, one of the things we had was like guided one-on-one experience. So, okay, let's make those best practices that you learned about having a good one-on-one more automatic because it's right there in front of you. And all you have to do is, instead of opening up a blank Google Doc for an agenda or nothing, open up this and it'll have, the right suggested topics. It'll make sure you're checking in on the right things. It'll keep track of the action items that you committed to, who committed to it and when. Just some of those basic blocking and tackling, just putting that on guide rails is just can be a really freeing experience for a manager that's trying to keep track of so much.
Yeah, and I think you ended up in a really powerful place by the time I met you and learned about Charma. But I think that originally the company had a different name and had a different sort of target. Staying on this entrepreneurial journey theme, if you will, what was the original name, and how would you describe what it was out to do, similarly or differently than where you ended up?
Yeah, I mean, the original name was Work Patterns, and that just the rebranding was more driven by the fact that name Work Patterns just isn't very memorable. There are a lot of companies out there that are work something. Work Patterns is also very long. It had a lot of letters. It was a compound word, work patterns smushed together. So we had the uppercase W, uppercase P. It ended with an S, which actually made pluralization and possessives complicated. So work patterns is his new feature, so that kind of stuff. So there's a whole, I think the as we've been talking about, the concept of helping to guide people's patterns at work was a very good descriptive name for that. But we had broader ambitions of building something a little more iconic and wanted a vessel that we could really own. And that was a big part of a rebrand to Charma, which we thought was more memorable and more gave us kind of that vessel of a brand that we could build, very optimistic, encouraging, charming, if you will, kind of play on that. So that was the thought process around the rebrand. The problem that we were trying to solve was, we definitely, as a software startup, tried a lot of different stuff that we validated with customers, put different things in front of people. But the problem space was always the same thing, which was how could, in my observation, as we scaled NextRoll and we got to hundreds of employees, there were a lot of tools that we got from HR that were very well intended, but would often fall flat in the organization. They were too cumbersome, they were too bureaucratic, and they were too disconnected from people's day-to-day work. And so that was really the problem that we were always trying to solve originally with Work Patterns and Charma, which was how could you build a toolkit that people would actually want to use on a day-to-day basis to help them guide their workplace relationships, not something that needed to be forced on them. And, they would have to roll their eyes and do their quarterly, review or whatever it is, but make those day-to-day habits more frictionless and take that mental overhead on a day-to-day basis. That was always kind of the thesis of the company.
Hearing, stay focused, laser focused on the problem, but be a little bit flexible in the solution and how you go about trying to solve it.
For sure. Yeah. It's the only way to, build something from 0 to 1.
And certainly, yeah, from 0 to 1 for sure. And then when you think about, you wouldn't have had the language for it, but what I love most about talent optimization, which came around, 2018, I think was when we really started leaning into this, is that it really does marry up perfectly the business elements and then the people side of it too, like all in the same place. It's really a tight integration. And too often we see one or the other. And what always impressed me the most about Charma was that you just instinctively got that. It was built around relationships. It was built it is clearly a business tool, but it doesn't forsake the fact that we have people and organizations doing meaningful work together.
Totally. I mean, so much of the language that is used to describe talent optimization and PI's mission in general is language that we, coincidentally landed on ourselves. And so, that always felt very symbiotic. And then, I think the thing that we were missing, we kind of put a lot of these workflows on guide rails and made them and took friction out of them and made it easier to implement best practices. But the thing that we were missing was some of the behavioral science that PI brings to the table and allows us to actually be even more opinionated in the product itself. So it's not just like, hey, here's a one-on-one and here you should have an agenda and, here are some generic things that you might talk about. We can now be more personalized and say, hey, here are things you should talk about based on the behavioral science and based on this person's reference profile and your reference profile and how that might impact your relationship.
It's a really powerful connecting point. And it's like you have all these different ways that we try to tackle the problem in isolated ways. So if you think about from the time that PI was created back in 1955, and there's other behavioral assessments out there too, that were kind of coming at it from a self-awareness perspective and maybe even others' awareness. And then a couple of weeks ago, I had a chance to sit down with Steven Rogelberg, who's considered the world's foremost authority on meetings and talks so much about meetings and how to structure these in very powerful ways, whether they're group meetings, but increasingly he just wrote a book recently about the whole one-on-one meeting. But the point that I was making is that the connecting point is what's now known as PI Perform, where you start to see that we can have the behavioral insights. We have the best practices about how to run a meeting, your point about having access to the notes and actually doing a good job with meetings. It really is kind of at the nexus of where everything can come together. It's very impressive.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, no, I mean, that's what made the concept so exciting for me too, and made me think this was a good next chapter for the company and a good next chapter for us as a team, was that it did feel like a very natural connection, and that some of all the science that PI has developed over the years is exactly what would make would help take our tool to the next level, as it were. And it seemed like it was a really natural fit for what PI needed also, like a way to bring those insights to people on a day-to-day basis. So they're not just kind of like out there theoretical or in the pre-hire process, but then kind of dropped later on. It would allow people to kind of bring that methodology and that approach to understanding people throughout the operations of the business, through your day-to-day, through your one-on-ones, through your other meetings, through how you give feedback and kudos and set goals and all those things. And obviously we're still early in the journey of integrating some of those things, but we're off to I think a pretty quick start. It's been 100 days or so, and we have a lot of that PI magic already baked in. So I'm excited to kind of take the next step in that integration.
Yeah, and let me come back to the PI post bit in just a second, but I wonder, when you were still operating as Charma, before you'd even had met with PI, I wonder when you think about the customers that you had in the early days who were going from basically nothing, or maybe they had something, but then they would get the value and they were your happiest customer, so to speak. In their own words, like, how would they describe what changed for them when they were able to use the Charma product? I wonder if we could borrow sort of their eyes and ears for a second. Like, what are the types of things would they say?
Yeah, I mean, feeling like we started the company at the very end of 2018, early 2019. And so we had, like a year or so to build product before we hit all the changes that occurred in early 2020 with the pandemic. And so we were very well positioned as a company to help solve the problems that people were experiencing at that time, where things felt immediately much more chaotic, the existing systems and processes were breaking down. People were looking for ways to maintain connection with people that they no longer would see on a daily basis, or could rely on the informal. You had to kind of be much more intentional with your practices and couldn't rely on those serendipitous encounters. And so, I think that was the initial response that we got was, hey, okay, this is helping to rein in the chaos. This is helping us to be more intentional. This is helping to make things more predictable and understandable. We have a clear way to operate. I know how to then, my old way of managing was, okay, I would kind of wander around and talk to people on an ad hoc basis. That's not going to necessarily work. A, that was probably never the best way to do things. And B, that's not going to work at all anymore. And so now having kind of this structure that kind of allows me to maintain my expectations for myself in terms of being a highly engaged, good manager that, stays on top of things going on with my people, kind of, okay, let's kind of solve that. I feel like there's been kind of a controlling of the chaos. And so that's kind of that kind of calming effect is kind of what we were, is what we would hear from folks. It's like, okay, like we tick the major box off. We understand that how to do these very important activities around managing people and teams.
And I think what's something that we didn't definitely when we were going through it and we sent people home to be safe, or, it took a long time to kind of shake that out a little bit. I don't think we understood quite as much how long the impact, we're still dealing with it all this time later. The reality is that post-pandemic workers have been through some things and are looking for more from the workplaces and even from work itself than what we used to get. So we're starting to see areas of wanting, belonging, or coaching and mentoring, or feedback, and these types of things in a more voracious way, I would say, even than the past. And a lot of companies stayed hybrid, if not fully remote, even after the pandemic. So it seems to me that the product is still really well positioned to address some of the lingering issues, and they're not going to go away anytime soon.
Yeah, well, certainly. I mean, whether you're hybrid, remote, or in person, I think a lot of these principles are pretty universal. People want predictability. They want to know that these activities, in terms of check-ins and having one-on-ones and follow through and commitments and feedback and guidance and clarity on their objectives and priorities, like those are just universal no matter how or where you work. And so, yeah, I think there was this kind of like rocket booster that with the shakeup of everything that put everything into question and allowed people to kind of reevaluate, hey, are we doing this the right way? But I think some of these things are universal regardless of, just we needed that catalyzing event for people to revisit this topic. But certainly it wasn't, these are the universal and timeless kind of truths around management that
it's true. And I think the other thing that we see from in the aftermath, if you will, is that there's more of a absorption of change that's still taking place because everything has changed. And I find that when we look at polls like from Gallup and they talk about the level of disengagement or burnout among managers, really, really challenging. When we talk to managers, they say, well, I don't have time. I don't have time to have, one-on-one meetings that are effective. I can't be prepared. I see a one-on-one if I've even got it on my calendar in the first place. And I'm like, oh, geez, is it already time for that? I'm like, totally. I'll just chat this person up and try to remember what we talked about last week. What a devastating miss that is in terms of trying to create, all the nature of what people are looking for most when it comes to work.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, one of our core principles is like making best practices automatic. And so taking that mental overhead and friction off of doing the things that you should be doing as a manager. And so, yeah, having to like wing it every time and feel like you're kind of entering into a freestyle rap battle every time you go into one-on-one is stressful. Versus kind of knowing, okay, I'm about to have my one-on-one with Matt. I know where to go to find out what we talked about last and what we're going to talk about this time. And I'm coming in prepared. I'm not getting blindsided. And I don't need to like spend a whole bunch of time thinking about, how to handle this interaction that's about to happen. So that's just, one example. We do the same thing with, we try to do the same thing with feedback. Feedback's super hard to give. It's super hard to write. It's hard to translate what you're thinking and feeling into words that will resonate and be understood in the right way for the right person. And so, we were the first company that I know of that used some of the breakthroughs in large language models and generative AI to help people write feedback. And so kind of allowing people to pick, okay, here are the adjectives that you're trying to put into words. Here are a few ways you could do that and give people a starting point. That's just a way to, that's a lot easier to just multi-select a few adjectives and then get a paragraph of text you can edit and add examples and put it in your voice and etc. versus starting with that kind of blank cursor flashing at you. It's like, okay, what am I going to say? So, and then a few minutes of that, you give up and the feedback never gets delivered. So that was really a core principle. Like, how do you take friction out of best practices?
I talk to so many managers who are like, I want to be a good coach to my workers. I just don't know what to say, or I want to give the feedback, but I'm not sure how to phrase it. And so what I'm hearing you say is that the product can actually provide a little bit of scaffolding there to help you get started having those conversations.
Yeah, and just take friction out of it and make it more likely that those high value interactions are going to happen.
Makes good sense. Now we'll go back to the post PI world. So you as a bit of a futurist and certainly an entrepreneur, you're in the habit of kind of looking ahead. So if I ask you to take out your crystal ball and let's say focused on Perform as it is today within the predictive index world, what is it that you see that's possible now for the hot product that you and your team built?
Yeah, I mean, so there's some like blocking and tackling stuff. So, we were a small team before the acquisition with, and now we have more resources. So there's definitely just like more functionality that we know customers want that we can build. And, those are that can be stuff that's kind of boring, but really useful, such as like administrative stuff and making it easier to manage the product and roll it out in your organization. So, we were always we always had a very democratized approach. So like very self-service and allowed people to adopt it on their own, but there's more we can do there. And then the really exciting stuff will be in the realm of incorporating PI data into the product. And so making it more personalized. We've already kind of chipped away at that by putting people's reference profiles into the one-on-one. So it's front and center. Some of the caution areas and guidance around interacting with the person are front and center when you're actually meeting with them. We're incorporating relationship guides into that experience as well. But there's so many ways that we can envision making the product more personalized and more guided by the behavioral science that PI has. That is going to be stuff we're going to be working on throughout the rest of the year and onward. So that's the really exciting stuff. Having more resources to build a lot of the stuff that we wanted to but couldn't quite get to. But really the thing that's going to make it really exciting and differentiated and just really be the only place that you can get PI data brought into your day-to-day work relationships.
Yeah, I think effective one-on-ones, effective team meetings, they don't have to be as rare as they are today. And I think the tool always did a great job of that. When you start thinking about bringing in and wiring in those behavioral insights, put them right at your fingertips when you need them, helping explain, oh yeah, that is why we might be struggling right now, or why we're not challenging each other or dealing with conflict effectively. Well, it's right there in the data. Like, how do we actually surface that in the moment of need and get to it? That's exciting to think about.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I get you out of here with the easiest question I have, which is where can listeners go to learn more about you, connect with you, learn about PI Perform? What do you think?
Sure. Well, I'm on LinkedIn, so Adam Berke, but PI Perform you can find on the predictiveindex.com website. It's under products, and predictiveindex.com/perform or /software/perform, both work.
All right. Well, that's great. Listeners, I'm going to have those links for you in the show notes. So you're only one click away from connecting with Adam, learning all about PI Perform. Adam, thanks so much for being with me today. Appreciate it.
You bet. Great to see you, Matt.